Thank you, thank you. Um, so, where's- uh, but when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to spare, but I perish here with hunger? And I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants." And he rose and came to his father. But while he was yet at a distance, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and embraced and kissed him. And the son said to the father, "I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and make merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And they began to make merry. Now his elder son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what this meant. And he said to him, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has received him safe and sound." But he was angry and refused to go in, and his father came out and entreated him. But he answered his father, "Lo, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a kid that I might make merry with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your living with harlots, you killed him. You killed for him the fatted calf." And he said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It is fitting to make merry and be glad, for this your brother was dead, and he is alive. He was lost, and he is found." Okay, let me give a couple comments on this before. First of all, I will say, is there anybody here who did not receive an AME as not on my email list? Yes, let me pass this around. Please give me your email, your name and your email, and I will send you an email this week. First of all, what's the setting? It's always good to look at the setting. It's a primary thing. It begins in 15:1, which says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him, and the Pharisees and the scribes murmured, saying, 'This man receives sinners and eats with them.' So he told them this parable." Okay, actually, there are three parables. The first is the lost sheep, and second is the lost coin. And here what we have is the lost son. In verse 12, he said, "Father, give me the share of property that falls me." Let's talk about inheritance a little bit and how it worked in the ancient world. Let me read to you from Deuteronomy 21:15. Now, this is a little longer than needs to be, but it gives you context. "If a man has two wives, and the one loved and the other disliked," he's got an unfavored wife, "and they have born him children, both the loved and the disliked, and if the firstborn son is hers that is disliked," so you got two wives, a good one, a bad one, according to, but the bad one just gives him his child first, the firstborn son. "And then on the day when he assigns his possessions as an inheritance to his sons, he may not treat the son of the loved one as the firstborn son in preference to the son of the woman of the wife he disliked, who is the firstborn. But he shall acknowledge the firstborn son, the son of the disliked, by giving him a double portion of all that he has. For he is the first issue of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his." Okay, let's talk about that for a second. Here's the way it worked in the ancient in Israel. And incidentally, it's not like this in the Roman world. Romans give it out, however the father wanted. This is the way it happened in Israel. However many sons you had, you would count them up. And then you would divide divide your land, divide your inheritance into that many portions, and then you would give the firstborn a double portion and give the rest of it amongst those who follow. Now, in this case, there were two sons. So you would divide, you would basically, the firstborn son, you divide it in two, and then give the firstborn son a double portion. And the secondborn son, you would divide it into three. And the firstborn son would get 2/3, second son would get 1/3. So whatever the portion was, I can't figure the mathematics of it right now, if he gets 10. I guess you divide it into 11 and give 2 to the firstborn, and then everybody else would get just one share. So in this case, what he would get is a 2/3 would go to his eldest son, 1/3 to his youngest son. Okay. So the youngest son would get 1/3 of his estate. Now, this is terribly unusual. This just didn't happen. First of all, the eldest, for a child to say, I want to leave, I want my portion of your inheritance, I'm going, that's a rebellious son. Yeah. This is the way rebellious children are looked at in Deuteronomy 21. If a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and though they chastise him and will not give heed to them, then his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of the city, elders of his city at the gate of the place where he lives, and they shall say to the elders of the city, This is our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. And then all the men of the city shall stone him to death with their stones. So you shall purge the evil from your midst, and all Israel shall hear and fear. This is right in the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt honor thy father and thy mother. So this is hard, fast law in ancient Israel. So the notion that a son would say to his father, I'm out of here. Give me what I get, and I'm out of here. That's a grievous problem. It makes me wonder, well, let's say this, these kinds of things didn't arise out of nothing, which tells me that there were rebellious teenagers in ancient Israel as well. So you had to put the fear of God in them somehow. So there's nothing new under the sun, don't you know? Second, it's very unlikely that this would be possible in this setting. Understand now, Jesus is talking to farm people mostly. Almost everybody in the ancient world lived in the countryside, and they were farmers, or they were craftsmen that supported the farm or did other crafts kind of work. So nothing was in cash. All your wealth was in land, and this notion of land being the source of wealth was true right up until the Industrial Revolution, folks. Mm-hmm. So you had all your stuff was in land, because that's where your income came from. Or you might be an artisan, you might be a craftsman in one case. So your inheritance, your wealth would be in your tools by which you could earn a living. The rest of the folks were day laborers, and they earned. It used to be that. I've seen this, particularly in the South, I think. Folks who were unemployed would go to a certain location, and if people needed a laborer, they would go up and hire somebody and take them to work. Well, that's the kind of day labor, it's about as low as you can get. India, you had no way of dividing it. You just couldn't divide it. So, two things about the setting of this. One is it's unlikely. Right? We don't see it. Now, if you happen to live in an urban environment, it was easily done. I mean, urban environment, well, you had people accumulated wealth and money and stuff like that. But this was not, Jesus was not talking to people in urban environment. Incidentally, the rest of the New Testament, when you get outside the Gospels, is aimed at urban environments. Paul was a city guy, and he traveled to cities. So it's just unlikely in the environment in which it was spoken, but probably not unlikely to the readers of the Gospels. So, okay, verse 15. Where it says, so he went and joined himself to the citizens of the country. He sent him into the fields to feed swine, and he ate the food of the swine because he was hungry. Pigs were particularly scorned. We know about the dietary laws of the Jews. They were very important to them. So they were extremely important to the Jews. Here's where they came from. The word was that you could eat anything that had a cloven foot and chew the cud. That's the rule. Leviticus 11:7. You couldn't eat certain shellfish and stuff like this, but in terms of land animals, Leviticus 11:7 says, and the swine, because it parts with the hoof and is cloven-footed but does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. Of the flesh you shall not eat, and their carcasses you shall not touch. They are unclean to you. Now it's interesting that pigs were eaten elsewhere. They were a staple, really, in many places. And verse 17, but he came to himself and said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to spare, but I perish here with them? We talk about servants a lot, and we distinguished last time between slaves, doulos, who could either be interpreted as slave or as servant. Now, this is not doulos. These are misthioi, which are actually people who are paid a wage, a day laborer, basically. Verse 20. And he arose and came to his father, but while he was yet at his father saw him and compassion on him and ran and embraced him and kissed him. This notion of showing compassion, it's really hard to pronounce in Greek. I'm not sure I can really even do it. Splachnidzomai, right? It means the bowels. The heavy emotions in the Bible are bowels, and that's don't get your bowels in an uproar. I mean, this is literally the seat of emotion, good emotion and bad. So that's the term that's used there. He said in verse 22, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. One of the ways you measured and accumulated wealth in the ancient world was with clothes and jewelry. We don't we don't think about that much because we go down to the rack and buy a t-shirt for $9.50, you know. And the clothes that we wear right now are all mostly bought off the rack and they're inexpensive. But that didn't happen, folks, until the Industrial Revolution, and particularly the spinning jenny. So, but if you look, interesting, if you look at paintings from the medieval period, etc., the robes and the clothes that people wore were just splendiferous. They were just gorgeous, and that was the way that you accumulated money. And so what's happened is that the father has re-enriched his child. Okay, verse 24 says, and kill 23 says, and bring the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and make merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. If you read verse 32, you say, this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. Now that's a literary device. It's called an inclusio. That is to say, something that brackets, that shows that what follows, what is in between these, is a specific separate item. And the specific separate item in this is the story about the second son. Okay. So there's the Carol Hendrickson.
And was, so
what do you got?
just a question, so are we thinking that this parable was for the Pharisees and scribes, or we don't know?
I don't know.
We don't
What do
know.
you think? This is where it's important to look at the setting of it, because they do tell you a lot.
Well, that's what I was wondering.
So you can't, what do you think? You think it is? I mean, the setting is, now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him, and the Pharisees and scribes murmured, saying, this man receives sinners and eats with them. And so he told them, quote, this parable, but there are 3 parables, all of which talk about things that are lost. So what do you think? We've been doing this for 20 years, and I've done all the talking for 20 years. This is a hard habit to break.
Well,
And are you asking us, where was Jesus when he gave these?
No, I'm asking you what you think about this parable.
oh, about the parable. Oh, then we can talk about that forever.
Talk about the parable. I mean, how does this parable speak to you? Does it touch you? Does it upset you? Does it distress you?
Oh, I love it.
Why?
I love it because it shows compassion
And forgiveness.
and forgiveness. Thank you. I'm looking right at you, so.
I'm making notes here because I'm going to try to report what you folks conclude about this.
So, when I think of it in the context, if the context is that this was for the Pharisees and the scribes, if that is the case, then I think,
We need to speak up.
oh,
You're speaking to the rest of the class, not me.
if this parable really is for the Pharisees and the scribes, then I think the part about the elder son is particularly important. Because maybe that is speaking to the Pharisees and the scribes. I don't think he views them as being.
Because of the special role of the elder son.
Yeah.
The story flies in the norm of what was considered appropriate or what the laws were of the day. And this is opposite of that. It's the youngest son, it's not the oldest. The oldest is trying to remind his dad that, you know, this is how it should be.
Which is the Pharisees and the scribes.
And
Right?
he's
This is a Deuteronomy 5th.
stuck his nose at the rules of the day. right? No, maybe not running his nose. No, I don't know what you can say.
You're saying the father is thumbing his nose?
I think Jesus was, the story itself is going, no, I'm not, you don't have to follow these, you follow the more important rule, which is be compassionate, be forgiving.
He's dismissing or he's setting aside the priority of the firstborn son. So you spoke that initially the firstborn son was given twice the inheritance. So in this case, it's a question of justice and equality, that he's saying that they're all equal, that they're all, you know, so it seems like that's in the lesson there, is that that instead of the firstborn being special, you're all special.
But it's also saying, to me, it doesn't matter what the firstborn son has done. I'm gonna treat my sons the way I wish to treat them.
Speak up.
It doesn't matter what my firstborn son, how loyal and loving and caring and he had been to me and mine, meaning the father. It's the second son that he's forgiving, in spite of who's brought nothing to the table, so to speak. Somehow he's going against the grain of the day, as well as what would make sense to me, but that's my perception of it.
And it's interesting, this idea of the firstborn son being special continues today in royalty. The
Yes.
crown is moved up, is passed on through the firstborn son.
Right.
So this isn't something that's in the ancient world, it's something that we still see
Continues.
today in equality. In my family, the firstborn son, there is a fifth generation China, and it's passed down through the firstborn son. It's a tradition, you know, so you see these things that this concept of the firstborn being special is something that continues in the story, you know, in the story from long ago, actually made all the sons and we'd like to suppose the daughters all considered equal.
So the old elder brother is really sort of angry, right? I think. And we can probably all identify with that to some extent. I mean, feeling like it isn't just because he's done all this work, he's followed the rules, he's done what he's supposed to do. And what does he get for it? Nothing, except then the father says, but you have everything of all. What does he say? He says, all that is mine is yours. So the father's also compassionate to the older son, even though the older son is. Right, I like that. I like that if this is about God, God is compassionate, not just to the younger son, but also to the older one who is expressing this anger.
What the interesting thing is we talked about the concept of the priority of the firstborn, but the argument that's coming in here is actually the argument about service. I've been the one that served you.
Right,
And therefore I deserve priority because I've, you
right,
know, I've been to church every Sunday, so I deserve priority. I get to step to the front of the line.
right.
And it's really saying that, you know, so it's interesting. We have kind of two concepts here. We have this concept of the equality based on your order of birth, and we have this concept of
Yes,
a priority based on the
service.
service that you give. So it's brought more complexity into the discussion.
So first of all, as an oldest son, I sort of like much of what they say my oldest sons. I don't want to knock that system. But I say, despite what we're told about these two sons, that sort of one is good and faithful and hardworking and loyal, and the other is sort of a wastrel, do nothing, no good person. That's the way they're framed in the story. When they speak on their own behalf, the oldest son is immediately covetous
Right,
and
Yes.
jealous.
right,
It's not fair. It's not fair.
right.
And the younger son is contrite.
Right.
And seeking forgiveness. So I would say there's some conflict between the way we are told
Yeah.
to see these two sons and the way that they behave, actually.
Yes, I agree.
But let's go easy on the older son.
Hey, it's tough being a middle kid.
Well, the father,
Yeah, that's us.
but the father, yes, I mean, clearly the older son is exactly, I think, exactly as you described, but the father does not admonish him. The father doesn't say, what are you talking about? You know, he says, he treats him also with compassion, right? By saying, so almost sort of understanding that anger by saying, yeah, I like how the father's treating the older son as well.
Yeah.
You know, so the older son is being sort of arrogant maybe, or certainly self-interested and not contrite. And yet, so you could think that the father would say, shame on you for that, but no, the father doesn't do that. The father speaks to him also with compassion. I think, by saying, all that I have is yours, and I like that.
And rejoice because your brother was dead
Right.
and is now alive and now he's back with us.
Right,
And
We have him back.
yeah,
the lesson that the younger son that was lost and, you could say you could compare it to had walked away from the church, yet you could always return and be forgiven. So so there's a lot of complexity in
yes,
in
that whole,
100 words here.
right. In fact, it would be much less complex if we left out the older brother, right? If it ended at verse 24, it would be a pretty simple story. I think. Because we would only have the son returning, and that would be it.
You have to consider the audience, I think, and the audience, at least I'm thinking he has a group of people that are listening to him that are probably like we are, but then he's also has the tax collectors, sinners, the Pharisees. He's speaking to his audience,
Yeah.
and that, what he's saying with the robe and the ring and the pig and all of that, it's flying in the face of tradition.
Mhm.
But it's also saying subtly that you are sinners and you too will be forgiven by God.
But there's an interesting public-private tension
Mhm.
Yeah.
in the story, is that the setting is very public.
Right,
And yet the experience of the youngest son is intensely personal and private. I'll recommend to those of you that like to Google around, one of Rembrandt's last paintings on the prodigal son.
oh,
So it's one of the great artists telling of this story. And included in the painting is only the father and the younger son.
Oh,
The audience isn't there at all, and the older son isn't there at all. But the younger son is on his knees in front of his father,
right.
his head buried in his father's cloak. with his arms wrapped around his father's legs, contrite and asking for forgiveness. It hits me when I see the visual representation that Rembrandt offers. It's intensely private, and an experience shared by these two individuals. And we have to contrast that with the way that it's presented to us in the Bible
I love that.
as something
That-
very public.
But when you make me think, when you say that way, you make me think about what does the father represent in a broader picture? Not just the leader of a family, the patriarch, but in a broader way, who is the father?
Right, I've just sort of always assumed that this is God the Father.
Yeah. Me too.
Or could it be the father? And you could put it in those, so you could speak to it in a very familiar terms about a family, or you could speak to it in the broader terms, and you could apply the same lesson at a universal level, and you could apply it at a small level. That's, and that just kind of occurred to me as you spoke the story. It's like that kind of popped out as an impression from that story.
As I thought about this parable, I'm thinking, could this be the ultimate message of grace, of forgiveness and judgment? And thinking of the prodigal son being Satan. Satan comes and is forgiven by God the Father, and the joy in heaven at his coming and rejoicing.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
Hadn't thought of that.
The fallen one,
Such grace,
Wow.
such forgiveness.
yes.
I'd like to just want to say something that it relates very strongly to me in today's time, I think, and to anybody who has an estranged child. The thought of that child coming back, the feeling of joy that the parent has in welcoming that child back into the family and into relationship again is a kind of a joy beyond measure, I think, and something I know I would really welcome in my family. And it is intensely personal. I really like the Brad's description of it being a very private kind of situation where the son is on his knees and is begging his father's forgiveness. It is intensely personal. That's all I want to say.
I also think there's a piece of it that is saying, you boys are not in charge of this situation.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And I hope you understand it. I hope you will come to understand it. But I'm not following the law. I'm doing what I think is right.
Right. That's a nice thought.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's very cool. I
I
like
like
that,
that.
Georgia.
Maybe as a parent, where I had a daughter that was estranged who came back. And I remember thinking I was right, but no, it was the forgiveness aspect.
I think that's what resonated with me is the father's action. That it's so powerful and it's instructive to us that we should be in a position where we forgive when we have children that go astray. And I just felt the father's action was just so powerful.
Well, I like that too. That's a great thought.
But I didn't see Satan in there. I didn't.
Good enough.
I didn't see Satan in there, but maybe that's just because I didn't look far enough, but just Do you see Satan in there? In that, this, I didn't see Satan in there.
But I think if you generalize it, I think I can see what you're saying, if you, pull back. You know,
Yeah,
I do, I like that thought as well.
But that's the power of the story, is
Mhm.
that you can apply it at innumerable levels. You can apply the lesson of,
True.
you know, I was a philosophy minor in college and, you know, we had a whole class just called theories of justice and, you know, this is, you know, justice and what's fair and what's right. So you can, you can apply this, you know, you could take, you know, think of how many situations in life, how many completely different situations in life that you could actually apply the lesson.
Can I ask a question about that? Given how you apply this, given that the setting seems to be the scribes and the Pharisees who are concerned about this, and that Jesus was eating with all these sinners. How does that apply to today? Who are the scribes and the Pharisees? Who were they then? And how does that apply to us today, you think?
Well, I find it interesting that he had to explain a lost concept 3 times. Perhaps he looked across to them and they had that blank look, because this was so revolutionary and they were so tied to the law, liturgical, and we get the best story of all.
Right, yeah.
You know, in your question there too, it could apply today to don't associate with those people, because those people are bad, and yet the story says, but those people are still human, and you have to see the humanity in them, and you have to see the forgiveness, and you have to see the road back.
Mhm.
And so, you know, I think, you know, perhaps, you know, the judgmental people that stand on a, you know, stand above and judge people. And that they think that they're better and they're in a position to judge you. No one is in a position to stand above us and judge us. You know, we can apply the story, and we can, you know, the lesser people in society that, oh, why are you talking to those people? You know, that's beneath you.
Right.
And maybe that's the story is, you know, that people will, you know, perhaps will ridicule us because we're, you know, and throughout history, the marginalized people and the people of society, it's, oh, you know, just forget those marginalized people. And yet the story said, you know, the Pharisees and the, you know, and I can think of all the very judgmental people out there today that, you know, will question that, you know, they are not tolerant, they are not forgiving to anyone. They don't tolerate people that are different. People, you know, there are people that unless you are the same as me, unless you believe what I believe, then you are wrong.
Mhm.
So aren't those the people that perhaps the story is, we could direct the story to and say, but, you know, and, you know,
Yeah.
Can I focus it a little more? What does, why was it a concern for the Pharisees and the scribes and the Pharisees that Jesus was eating with sinners? And what difference does that make to the writer of the gospel?
Well, they must not have considered themselves to be in that group of the sinners.
Say that again, please.
They must not have considered themselves to be among the sinners because they were hoity-toity Pharisees. So they were those people that were up here, and I know that tax collectors were often thieves. So they were really low on the totem pole strata. This reminds me of, I visited India and the caste system is alive and well there. You've got down here, up here, you know. Same thing.
You know, I was reading something interesting recently, just from a show I started, Googling, as he said, and reading about Puritans, and the Presbyterian Church comes from the Puritan movement back in the Scottish Presbyterians that's where they came from. And in the show, and I read that, in a Puritan society, that unless you were pure and that you had performed some kind of a miracle, so you were at the in crowd, when you died, you couldn't receive a funeral within the church, and you couldn't be buried within the church cemetery. So you were those other people, and that was, because I've kind of thought about that a lot, that, the harshness and the judgment of the Puritans, and yet this church we have here today, that was its foundations back in the Reformation, and in those times, they did differentiate, and I learned in the cultural cemetery in parts of the world, you talk about India and in Asian cultures and so forth, you're either an insider or an outsider. And if you're an outsider, that whatever happens to you, it doesn't matter, because the only thing that matters is for the insiders. So for the Pharisees and so forth, they are the insiders, and this story threatens them. It threatens to say that the outsiders need to be included too.
And
Do you think it was important, it's important to the story that, the prodigal son was feeding the pigs and eating the pigs' food? That's a detail of the story that's
Yeah, it
real
is.
clear. Why is that there?
Why is it said there?
Why is that included in the story? Let's look at storytelling, right? And it's just like this when you read the newspaper or listen to the news. Somebody has to select facts and items to put in any story. Whether it be a newspaper, whether it be a short story, a novel, or whatever. And when a person telling the story or reads the news or whatever takes a particular fact and puts it in there, that's a choice.
So
What's the significance of that choice?
it makes the prodigal son very distasteful to the Pharisees and the scribes,
Why?
because eating, first of all, pigs are very lowly, right?
Right?
And it suggests that he would even have wanted to eat what the pigs were eating, the lowliest of the low, the unclean. He was unclean, it certainly, if they didn't object, if they had no objection to him traveling, at least they would object to the pigs.
Why would they object to the pigs?
Are unclean and unholy the same thing?
Say that again.
Are unclean and unholy the same thing?
They're unholy.
Unholy.
What does that mean? Why are they unholy?
They're
Well,
not
because
following the
they
word.
don't follow the law,
They don't follow the law.
right?
And where was the resistance to Jesus?
He's breaking the law.
Good point.
And who stood for the law?
The Pharisees.
Okay, so all of a sudden we have not only the personal aspect of this,
Right,
there's a religious connotation here that is real clear.
right. Good point, Ed.
Are we giving the father more credit for being insightful? That, what about God's grace in this son here?
What about God's grace?
Yeah. Does it pick anywhere in this whole story? But for the grace of God, there go I, the father saying in reference to his own son.
What do you guys think?
That's a good question, Henry, just,
I mean,
I don't have the answer to that yet.
I don't understand, I don't understand the question. Are you thinking that the Father is different than God?
I'm thinking in this relationship with his sons. The father may reflectively be saying. Relative to the prodigal son who came back. And do I forgive, and to what extent do I forgive? I could have made the same mistake as my son made. If only for the grace, if
Oh,
not
I
for the grace
see.
of God.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
I could be asking my father, I could have been asking my own father for forgiveness.
But he's acting like the father. In his role, he's representative of the father who has that grace.
Yeah.
So he's actually
Well, that's
behaving
fine. I don't have a
like
problem
the
with
father.
that, yeah.
Like
I
the
don't have a
father.
problem with that, and I'm saying reflective in his own, from his own childhood, his own adult, his own experiences, he says. Gee, I could have asked the same thing of my dad, give me my peace and let me go. And then come back begging for forgiveness and bring me back into the family, into the fold.
Well, he's
I don't know.
acting God-like, because he's not, analyzing what you're talking about, he's, oh, good.
Well, I don't know, he hadn't thought about that all along. He just didn't have the opportunity to operate in it until the son came home. I'm sure there are many situations in life where quote unquote practical children are out there, and we as parents hope with our hearts and best intentions that someday, some way our children will come back. And how will we react to them when they do come back? Will we be forgiving or will we punish? And we say, your brother or sister deserves this better than you because they stayed.
Is he gonna say, you have to do, for me to forgive you, you have to do X, Y? When you say those things, I'll think about it.
How many parents have cast out a child and the child is dead to them? You know, you didn't, I think that the child, the son that comes out as gay, so the father casts him out and says, you're dead to me. You are dead to me.
Yeah.
And they never bring the child back. So this story is in contrast to the.
So I think it's also.
We have 5 minutes, folks.
I think it's interesting that the father, in my case being God. It's interesting that the father sees the son way off and does not at that time know that the son is contrite or repentful. And the father is filled with, sees him, filled with compassion and runs to him and puts his arms around him and kisses him before the son says a word. The son hasn't said, Father, I've sinned. The father is reaching out before that even happens. And when I think of God, our God.
Would that be grace?
I think that's grace.
That's great.
I just keep thinking that, you have some compassion for the Pharisees because they've been trained in a certain way, and we, all of us, every one of us, I don't care what church we're in, have seeds of judgmentalness
Yes,
in us, all of us,
yes.
not just the Pharisees.
My grandparents
I agree.
were Baptists they were from the American church, which was far more conservative than the Southern Baptist Convention, and they were I would play hockey on Sundays and my grandma would say, you're gonna go to hell because you should be in church, you shouldn't be playing hockey on a Sunday. And it would be very judgmental of me.
Yeah,
And because I think of today and I think of the fundamentalists that are like the Pharisees, that are so judgmental that they're
but
unable to, ask them to apply this story. I would like to ask them, how does this story to apply to your life and the way that you?
I know, but just think
Judge.
of this, the father, even for those Pharisees, even for them, he says, everything that I have is yours.
Yeah.
So God's reaching out to them as well, so we don't have to judge them either,
Mhm.
right?
But we do it.
But
because
we do, that's right, you're right.
It's part of the DNA.
It's too bad that Luke didn't tell us how this story was received.
Oh, yes,
I didn't get that question.
I said, it's too bad that Luke didn't tell us how the story was received.
right, did they have him, go out of town, like on how they threw him off the mountain, tried to throw him off the mountain that one time, remember?
Were their jaws hanging open at this one?
I can't
imagine they would instantly change their minds.
I don't.
Well, of course, Luke is writing a long time after that parable was spoken
Yeah,
by Jesus, so we couldn't possibly know.
no,
Let me just point out how it ended with Jesus. So how was his message received?
Oh, good point, Ed, great point, well taken.
They were like, cha-ching, there's another one, cha-ching, there's another one.
Yeah.
Yep, we're gonna get him.
Nobody was probably keeping score.
Yep, I think so.
Hey, Ed,
Yes,
when we're studying these, did you want us to study about the lost sheep at the same time, or is that?
we're gonna come back to that.
Okay.
See, those are distinct parables.
Three
We
together.
talked about the different kinds of parables, and what I'm doing right now. For instance, in those two parables, one's the lost coin and one's the lost sheep. One of them occurs in more than one gospel. So, my hope is, as we read these parables, we'll get a sense of how the gospels came together. And how they were understood by the church and actually manufactured by the church. This particular story is in Luke only. And many of our favorite parables are from Luke. I mean, he's a master parable teller. He's the one who has the most of his own. And so, so I'm trying to categorize these, and I'm just kind of working on it as I go along. I picked this one first incidentally, we're just about finished here. Because it's so full.
Yeah.
Right? This is a very enormously compact story here, and has a lot to say, and maybe incidentally, we can talk about it some more next week. I will open next week and ask if you want to follow up on any of this, and I'm going to, next week, we're going to read the parable of the sheep and the goats from Matthew. And that is Matthew 25. 31 through 46. That's another one that occurs only in one.
Matthew 25, you said?
Matthew 25, 31 through 46.
The parable of the 10 bridesmaids.
No, this is the parable of the sheep and the goats. Occurs only in Matthew. And it says something about the Gospels themselves. Where they have individual, where they're the only one to copy this. That's says something about the gospel writers. So I'm hoping that as we read this and discuss them, and as you folks read them, you'll start asking the question, why did Luke include this? And what did Luke mean to say? What were the issues that Luke was facing? Now, and that's that we turn there. I mean, this is powerful parable, absolutely powerful. And we turn to our individual feelings. Yes, absolutely. And it goes a long way. So that's why I selected this as is the first
Children
one.
to the nations,
Okay, any questions before we go?
many.
I will come back. I will come back as we, just as normal way, I will come back to it next time so we can continue to talk about it if we need to. Okay,
Ed,
yes,
there's a question.
No, not a comment.
Oh.
I'd like to come back to it because I'd like to go think about your question earlier of us. How does it relate to today?
okay, that's fine. That's fine, these gospels touch us in a way that, that the other kinds of stuff we read, particularly in the epistles, don't. They do touch us in a different way. Particularly when you get into things like church conflicts and stuff like that, and church dynamics. That's hidden there, it's there. Thank you, folks.